Hello everyone, Scott Murphy here. Today I wanted to discuss the concept of default form and why it's critical to which exercises you choose to be aggressively progressive with. Default form is what I call the form that's assumed during rep and or load limits, particularly the most vulnerable joints in a given exercise. Default form is critical to which exercises you choose to be aggressively progressive with, because on exercises that you are aggressively progressive with, you're inevitably going to be at those load limits and or weight limits, and as such you're going to fall into default form. And when you fall into default form, you want the most vulnerable joints in those motions to be in durable positions and or safe positions. So as such, you want to avoid exercises or avoid being aggressively progressive on exercises in which the default form renders the most vulnerable joints in vulnerable and or threatened positions. Alternatively, you want to reserve aggressive progression for exercises or modifications of exercises in which the default form has you in a durable position, particularly the vulnerable joints, the most vulnerable joints in an exercise in that durable position. A practical example of default form is in that of an overhead press. Believe it or not, one of the most vulnerable joints during an overhead press, which most people do standing, is the lumbar spine. And particularly what happens is the lumbar spine is prone to hyperextension. When people are doing overhead presses, when they're trying to hit PRs, whether it be a rep PR or a load PR, it's not uncommon at all. It's probably more common than not, in fact, for people to hyperextend their low back as they're doing it. And they're in that hyperextended position, they're vertically loading themselves, which exacerbates that hyperextended position. So as such, you don't want to be repetitively pushing poundage and or rep limits with a standing overhead press if your default form entails hyperextension of the low back. Unless you have like a phenomenal coach like David Guzman, who I follow on Instagram, I suggest you do too, chances are you are going to reflexively, even with the utmost conscientiousness, you're going to be hyperextending your low back. A modification to this is doing your overhead presses seated on the floor. And most people press out of a rack, so adjusting the support pins down there is no problem. But being seated on the floor, you unrack the bar and press above the head. You can't hyperextend the back because the thighs have the pelvis in, or the thighs in a flex position prevent the pelvis from anteriorly tilting excessively. So no matter what limits you're pushing, whether it be poundage or repetition, the probability of you hyperextending your back is virtually none. And if you're concerned about falling backwards, you could always anchor the feet as well. So as such, it's a great way in which to push overhead pressing, poundage, and or rep limits, durably. So anyway, hopefully my bringing up and addressing the concept of default form and how it's critical to which exercises you choose to be aggressively progressive on is helpful. Feel free to leave me a comment and let me know if it was at all helpful. Thanks so much.